Hi, my name is Dr. Wendy Grant. I usually go by Dr. Wendy around here at Capilano University. I'm the music history instructor here, and I absolutely adore teaching music history because music history is an artistic portal into the past. History, some people think that it's very dry, it's all about battles and kings and queens and politics, but when we study music history, we actually study the people who wrote music, who sang music, who played music, and we think about their culture and the people that they actually were. Just as if in the future people want to study our culture, they could talk about global warming or terrorism, but they might want to listen to our music. All of the music that accompanies our lives that would allow people to gain more insight into who we were as a culture. So one of the cultural lenses that I want to look through just in this little talk today is one that occurred in the 12th century in the south of France with a group of noble men and women who called themselves the troubadours and the troubadours. They put a high value on writing poetry and melodies, and this was a very important thing at court. The men were the troubadours, and they generally wrote poetry that we think of as courtly love poetry. It was all tied up with chivalry and things like that. It had to do with worshiping a lady from afar and writing music and poems to her, putting her up on a pedestal. Now, this was not a relationship that was going to happen because she was undoubtedly married to somebody else. But it was a high compliment to her and to her husband to have this kind of poetry. The women, called the troubadours, tended to write poems that were a little more practical, pragmatic, and they also engaged in debates with the men through their poetry and song. There's several good examples of that, and it's really quite fascinating. This tradition really kind of ended in the 12th century, and some composers continued writing this kind of poetry, but the society was dissipated by a crusade. But if we jump to the 15th century, we get a composer called Antoine Benoît. And he was in service to Charles VII, who was the King of France at the time. And I'm going to play you a song that was written in about 1460. It's a very, very beautiful song, and it's one that has a text that carries on this tradition of courtly love. It's called Je ne puis vivre. Talk about this chanson by Benoît. This is the Je ne puis vivre, and I'll just kind of read through what he says in this, because this is a text that we would normally associate with courtly love, with adoring a woman from afar. It says, I cannot live this way forever unless I have in my pain some comfort. A single hour, or less, or more, and every day, loyally, I will serve love until death. Lady, noble in name and in arms, for you I have written this song, while from my eyes I am crying hot tears, so that you will have mercy on me. As for me, I am dying in good course, awake every night, pacing around 100 times, crying loudly, vengeance to God, for most unjustly I am drowning in tears. When I need it, I get no help, and pity sleeps. And then there's a refrain saying, I cannot live this way forever. Now, this is definitely the kind of text that we would hear from back in the 12th century, but there's something really amazing about this text. If I actually change to this piece of paper, what I'm going to see is that on the left-hand side, the first letter of each line is highlighted, and if we look at Y, it actually spells the lady's name, Jacqueline d'Arqueville. Now, Jacqueline d'Arqueville was a lady-in-waiting to the wife of Charles VII of France at the time. And so what we see in this chanson, which is one of 4 that are associated with her name, a real relationship between a man who was in service to the King of France as a singer in his chapel and the lady-in-waiting to the Queen. It's kind of like a romance that's embedded in the music. And we know that one of the poems that is part of this series was probably written by her in response to him. And so that's another link to that kind of debate that went on between men and women through music in the Middle Ages, and now we can see continues into the Renaissance.